Guys, it's PrimordialAA here doing part 2 of Heads Up Sit and Goes from scratch, focusing on fundamental concepts. So we're going to be doing a little bit different type of review style here today. Previously you saw me doing a slideshow and talking about fundamentals in that and then playing some live games. And today we're going to be doing hand history review, which personally I always feel the student can get a lot more out of when I'm coaching, and I just think it's a much more effective way of getting across concepts and gives you extra time to talk about ranges. I think it's a better tool for learning, especially when you're focusing on fundamentals, and then later on you get into more the automatic ABC kind of feel that you get when you have to be playing games, making decisions on shorter time frames, etc. So the replayer I'm using today is the Universal Replayer, also known as Pop Pop Pop. It's my favorite without a doubt for Heads Up Sit and Goes, so if you guys are looking to review some hand histories or go over some with friends or study with people, I'd suggest getting it. It's free, it's online, you can just find it if you Google it. So these are two $11 games I played recently, both $11 Heads Up Turbos, and let's take a look at them. When I was playing these, I'm just focusing on the fundamentals that I talked about. I'm going to be raising a lot in position, c-betting as much as I can, and just letting it go from there. So first hand, ace-jack, is pretty automatic. He limps here, and early on when you see limps, we're only really going to be raising the upper parts of our ranges, especially at the lower limits, just because we want to get a feel for how the players are. A lot more players here are maniacs, and you'll see at the higher limits, and you don't want to get involved in big pots with them out of position. So king high is pretty good, and we check it behind. Flop 2 pair on a really connected board, lots of straight draws, lots of flush draws. So here I opt to lead out, which could be a check raise a lot of times if we knew more about him. But I have no reason to think that he's going to stab at this in a limped pot, so I go ahead and lead and let him float his pretty wide range. I'm assuming he may raise sometimes with a weaker king. He'll also raise some hearts, call a lot of hearts, and possibly some straight draws or just ace highs. He goes ahead and folds, and we move on. Here, triple three, flop. Just no, you can't really expect, obviously, him to have hit this, and you expect most pocket pairs and some aces to re-raise pre-flop, so this is a really, really easy continuation bet. We go ahead and make it, and he folds, which is one of the reasons the c-bet is so powerful, is because most of the time, like in this board, both of you are going to miss the flop entirely. So therefore, the person who's putting in the bets, or being the aggressor, is usually going to win more pots. He raises here, and it's only a min raise, so our odds are, alright to call, but we should be focusing on just staying as tight as we can out of position unless he forces us to open up a little bit. And he's been limping a couple times, he hasn't been raising, so we're just going to throw away our weak hand here and move on. Again, there aren't so many hands we're going to fold pre-flop, so we go ahead and open with 8-10. We flop middle pair, and he leads into us. He only leads half pot. And our kicker is still pretty good. 8-9, 7-8 are hands that could reasonably call pre-flop and would have hit this and led their middle pair. Some kings, but normally people are more inclined to check raise or try to slow play their top pair type hands. So I go ahead and make the call, and we look to evaluate on the turn. So us having position and having raised pre-flop, this card should be pretty scary to him. I would expect him to check back even if he had a king here. So it really polarizes his range. He should have an ace or better, so an ace, 2 pair, or some kind of draw that he's continuing to bet. And a lot of times draws will check here too and try to get a free card. So other than that, I'm going to assume the rest of his range is going to be bluffs when he's betting. Here he fires out. It's less than half pot, so I guess he could be value betting a king here. It could be reasonable. But it's unlikely, especially his giving his lead on the flop, and against an unknown I'm going to make this call most of the time. And the important thing here is I see a lot of inexperienced players make a raise here because this ace is a scare card. And we have very good showdown value, and we're getting a lot of value out of him bluffing. That's the only reason we're calling, is to as a bluff catcher essentially. So turning our hand into a bluff is just not very good right here. So you want to just call. Raising is a bit of a spew and a pretty bad play. The king pairs here, making it less likely, much less likely for him to have the king. So I plan on calling almost any reasonable river bet. So up to about 360, 380, almost a pot size bet. He bets much less, again less than half pot, and we go ahead and make the call. He shows up with 4-3 suited for no draw, no pair, and obviously the way he played this hand is very, very bad. He couldn't represent much, and there's not much that we're gonna call the flop and call the turn with that folds the river. Maybe 5-7, 7-9 or hearts, but a lot of times we're gonna pair or have a high card that we're gonna call with. It's just him betting less than half pot isn't gonna get many folds. And also leading here is pretty bad. Check raise is much stronger and could have very easily gotten me off of my hand. So here we go. He raises 5x here. So when they raise so much pre-flop, I'm assuming he's probably pretty mad about that last hand. He seems to be steaming a little bit. So I'm going to tighten up if I can, if he continues this, and just let him go crazy for a little bit and see if we can catch him. We fold 9-4. It's just, not really going to hit much post-flop. It's not a very good hand to be opening, and we just saw that he's starting to be a little bit more aggressive, so we're just going to get rid of it. He makes it 5x again, and we will pitch our 3-4 suited, as we would to even a min raise. So we go ahead. We haven't seen him 3-bet us yet. He hasn't been aggressive towards our aggression. He's opened up to 5x, but he hasn't really showed us he's going to play back at us. So I'll continue to open my normal range until he shows me that. And this, a paired board again. There's a flush draw on it, but it's very unlikely that he hit a piece of that. There's nothing even resembling a straight draw out there, so this is a board we're going to see bet 100% of the time, especially given that he's shown us he can give up on boards. He hasn't check raised, he hasn't played very aggressive. It seems like he's a pretty uneducated player. So we make our c-bet and we take down another pot. He continues to 5x and we continue to fold. When we do decide to play a hand, we'll normally just be going all in pre-flop. Sometimes we'll be making a 3-bet to about 350 normally, trying to get him to bluff all in, but a lot of the times we'll just be going all in ourselves. So we fold Jack 3 on the button, and fold our King 3 to his 5x, and we just continue, tighten up a little bit, but not too much, keeping mostly the normal ranges that we had talked about. So here's an interesting spot though. He 5x'd, 3 or 4 buttons in a row that he decided to play. He made it 5 times the blind. And now he limps here, and we have Queen 10. Queen 10's well above average. Normally, if he was playing as a normal opponent, you wouldn't want to raise Queen 10 here, especially against an unknown. Early on in a match, it's not a very good hand because people aren't going to limp call wide enough, and it can put you in a lot of tough situations post-flop when you flop either one of these pairs. But against him specifically, I would assume that he's going to continue to raise his decent hands big, and anything that's not very good, I just think the limp is going to include much more of the worst parts of his range, the lower ends of his range. So we go ahead and raise out of position here, but you have to understand that it's mostly adapting to him not 5xing anymore, and not so much something that we would do as a standard. He makes the call. Flop is ace high, a couple of draws out there, but again, we've seen that he can give up. He plays what most people call in heads up, fit or fold. He's just going to be calling or playing if he hits a piece of the flop, and other than that, he's giving up, which makes it very, very easy to play against if you just continue to apply pressure. So we make our c-bet, 3/4 of the pot, and he folds. So 7-6, we've been raising a decent amount and c-betting 100% so far. We haven't checked behind any flops. So I decide we want to see a flop with this because connectors play really well post flop, and we don't really want to play a big pot. So I just go ahead and limp. I see how he reacts. It's going to help us allow a lot at higher blinds to see how he's going to react to situations like this, which is really good to know and can help us a lot when we get to tougher situations later on. He min raises us, giving us 3-1 in position with the button, so obviously we're going to be making the call with any two cards. Even if I limped 7-2 offsuit, I'll be calling that. Well, maybe not. Maybe that's a little bit extreme. We wouldn't limp 7-2 normally. But against this particular player, we're calling basically any cards we're limping there. And he leads full pot, and we just give it up. It's not a big deal. It's not a very good board to bluff at, given it's his first time he's raised when he's out of position. So we just let it go and give up a small pot. Folds to our 8s, and we go ahead and raise 9s. So the flop comes king 6-9, and he leads full pot at us. Now, when we saw him lead half pot, he was bluffing before with his 3-4, and he continued to bet small his half pot bets. Here, there's a couple of draws out there: 7-8, 10 jack, jack queen for gut shots, and some hearts, as well as some other things. But I think, seeing how he's been raising, he's been 5xing quite a bit and playing pretty aggressively, I assume he's going to be bluffing at least some part of the time here, and I also assume that he'll probably continue with either a king or a bluff on the turn. So I opt to just flat. If his range was more narrow, and we think he's only going to be doing this with a bit stronger hands, but hands that could be scared easily if an ace or heart or any of the connecting cards to make straights come, then I would almost certainly raise. But because I feel this player is aggressive, call is much better in this situation. We had a pretty safe turn card. Opens up another draw, but it only completes 7-8, and we're not too worried about that. He checks it to us. And now there's just too much out there. There's too many draws. A king is not going to get away from his hand here. Neither is any two pairs or most draws from this player. So I'm going to go ahead and make a value bet here. I'm going to try to get him committing to a worse hand. Not many 9x hands are going to be there, but maybe some ace-6, any draws, or the king. So I go ahead and just bet 200 into 360. Pretty safe bet. Gives him a lot of room to try to shove here if he thinks he's going to make a fancy bluff, and he flats us. Now we get one of the worst rivers that we could get, and the straight comes on the board, only needing one card to a straight, and there's a lot of 7x hands that could have played this way. You know, you expect to see 6-7, maybe 7-8. 7-8 we're already beat on the turn, so it's not a big issue, but a lot of 7x hands regardless could be in there, especially from an aggressive player. So he leads out 100 here, and it puts us in a pretty interesting spot of whether or not we want to shove. We're never folding, obviously, so it's whether or not we want to shove or whether or not we just want to call. He has 520 behind, and we have to think what he's going to call with. This player, with the pace of the match, he's been playing pretty aggressive, but we've been getting the best of him every hand that we've played so far. We haven't even had a losing pot here besides pre-flop. Not really, nothing big. And so therefore, I went ahead and I assumed that he's going to call with any two-pair hands, mostly out of frustration, but I think most players, even at higher limits, the worst players will call a lot of two pairs here. And a lot of two pairs, just as many as 7x hands came in, 8x hands came in. So I think we're going to see a lot of two pairs here. I think kings will also look us up sometime. So because of that, I opted to shove. And I'm shoving for value here, obviously, not as a bluff. And he folds. So, you know, we don't really know what he had. He could have had the 10 jack, jack queen type hands, or he could have had hearts. I don't think he's going to get away from a king there, but I think his range, his calling range, is going to be wide enough that it will be okay for us to shove there. So he folds, and now we're, under 20 big blinds. We're about 17 big blinds deep. So we should be, if you remember from the slideshow that I showed you guys, we should be min raising here, and we'll see how it goes. So he open shoves first hand, 17 big blinds, once he's gone low. So just like when he was 5xing, there's not going to be a lot of hands he can do this with that are profitable. Some aces that don't play well post flop would be okay to do it with. It's not really great. And also some low pocket pairs, because we assume we have a post flop edge on him, so it will probably be the best way he can play like 2-2 through 6-6 or something like that. So we just fold, we give it up, and now we know we have to proceed cautiously. So again, just like before, we're going to be tightening up a little bit. And just waiting, trying to pick out the best spot that we can to get it all in with. He open shoves again, and 4-5 suited a hand we like to see post flop with, but to this bet there's just nothing you can do. Now we limp 9-7, and this, it's kind of debatable. We're not sure that he's going to shove our limps. Just like before, he had been 5xing every button, but not putting on any pressure when he was out of position. So I go ahead and limp here. It plays alright post flop, and I just kind of want to feel him out. So we limp, and he shoves. We're not sure what it means. It's the first time that he's done it. He could have picked up a decent hand and tried to just continue it, trying to make us think he'll still be bluffing here. But we just fold and decide we're going to have to proceed again cautiously. He opts to limp this time, and we check back our king high. Showdown value is always good. We can't really raise him here, and so it's basically the only option. If we raise, the best play would probably be just a shove, but it's not very good. It's not even going to be positive EV most of the time against most players, so your only option here is really to check. We check Tam on the very dry king a3 board, hoping that he'll stab, hoping he'll have us, maybe try to trap us with a stronger hand. Any pair of nines through jacks kind of get played this way sometimes. But he checks it behind, so we're gonna give him no more chances and just go ahead and lead out on this turn. I expect any pair to call here, and again, a lot of ace highs. But he chooses to fold, so we win that pot. Now I limp 8-5 again. Not the best spot. Maybe it's not even the best play here, but it's not. You just don't want to get carried away with it. You do want to feel him out. We want to make sure we know his tendencies, but we don't want to be giving away too many chips while we do it. So he shoves once again, and that should be the last of limping mediocre cards like that. We get queen 8. He folds to us, and we come to jack 2. This is going to be a fold whether we're deep, and a lot of times whether we're short, even when we're short, especially versus an aggressive player. So just go ahead and toss it. He now decides to raise about half his stack, a little bit less, but to us it's essentially a shove. So we get rid of it again, and here we have ace 5. We're 21, 22 big blinds deep. Really interesting how to play this hand. We can't shove profitably, so we can limp and hope he shoves. We're calling if he does, because he's obviously shoving wide enough that our ace high is going to be good most of the time. Or we can min raise and try to get him to rebluff over us, but also don't have the risk of him checking behind on us. We decide to just limp, and for once he checks behind. So we get a really bad flop for our hand. It's a scary board, but I don't expect him particularly to get away from any pair here, as well as get away from any straight draws or flush draws, really, obviously. So he checks, and we check behind our ace high. The 4 comes on the turn. He checks again. We'll go ahead. We just opt to check. We're going to try to check it down with him, get the sheep showdown, and win the hand the majority of the time. Now a 9 peels off, and he's been pretty aggressive so far, so I would have expected him to bet out some of it, pretty decent amount of his straight draws or flush draws earlier in the hand, but at the same time, when he bets twice the pot here. We're really unsure what he has. We've never seen him do anything like this before. We just know that he's been acting kind of crazy. He's been open shoving. He seems like he's tilted or upset about it. So I think about it for quite a long time here. I timed down for a while, and I made the decision that I really thought he could just be on complete air here, or, well, more likely than not, I expect him to have bet, obviously, a flush draw, maybe 8-10, and normally complete air, just trying to get me to fold. I wouldn't expect a jack to turn into this here, but I guess a slow-played king could be turned into it here, but it would be a really bad play for him to raise it like this on the river. So I talked myself into making a pretty marginal call. Most of the time I would say just fold here. We can find pretty good spots against him, but I make the call and he shows up with king deuce. So we lose that pot. Not the greatest spot in the world, but after narrowing it down, I still think that it's a way a bad player is going to play their air hands a lot of the time, just because they know they're losing if they check, and I've shown a lot of weakness and they don't really know what to do with their hand. So we get jack king here. He limps. We're 25-ish big blinds deep, and we decide to raise. Now it's kind of interesting because we would hate to see him shove on us here. We would absolutely hate it because our hand plays really, really well post-flop. It's going to dominate a lot of hands that he gets involved with, and we just love to see a flop with this hand. So if I think he has a very high risk of limp re-raising me all in, then I'll certainly check this behind. But I think he's going to call us here much more than he's going to shove. So I go ahead and raise for value, and he makes the call. We flop middle pair, top kicker, with a backdoor flush draw, and, you know, a couple draws on the board, 8-10, queen 10, some dominated jacks are going to be out there, and I expect a lot of his aces for him to continue to keep raising it, you know, 9x pre-flop or shoving, whatever. We got a little bit deeper, so we could have changed it, but I still expect to be well ahead of his range here. We lead out, standard continuation bet, and he goes ahead and makes the call. And I guess one thing to note here is pre-flop, I didn't make the raise size too big. You know, when we're deeper before the flop, you're going to be 4xing it pre-flop. You can't always do that post-flop. You can't always do that when you get shallower. You're going to be giving away too much if you're ever raising and folding, and they should start doing it with a lot of small pocket pairs, limp re-raising all in, hands that play much better that way if you're raising them with any decent frequency. So here I chose to just do 3 times the blind, even though we're out of position, because he's too short to take advantage of getting 2-to-1 with position, and our specific hand dominates a lot of his calling range. So it's good for 2 reasons, and we really want to get him involved here, even though we have to play the hand out of position. Now once he calls, this is a really bad card for us. It opens up another draw, a ton of pairs filled out. Most of the draws that were on the flop got there, so we're definitely just going to check here. I still don't assume that he's going to have us beat most of the time, but we can't really bet for value here anymore. There's just aren't enough hands that are going to call us. Very, very few, besides weaker jacks. So we check, and he chooses to check behind here. Now when he does that, I'm almost positive we have the best hand, and the 3 rolls off. So the decision comes whether we want to bet for value or whether we want to check and give him the ability to bluff. Now because our play was so standard, we raised before the flop, we made our continuation bet, and then we just shut down. We could have a ton of hands here. We could have, you know, pocket pairs. We could have just do it with any suited connectors. So it's really, really a good spot for him to try to bluff us with. And because I do think he's going to call some dominated jacks, I don't want to get it all in here. So it's kind of a little bit about pot control, but it's mostly about just opening up his bluffing range. Because he's not going to call us so much, it's better to just give him the ability to bluff here. So we check. He chooses to check behind. So it doesn't work out, but we still take down the pot. And he had called the flop with 9-6 backdoor flush draw as well. Now we're back under 20 big blinds. right around 18, 19 big blinds, and we choose to min raise this hand, which is fine. He hasn't shoved over us, he hasn't reshoved any of our min raises, and we can limp, but we just want to continue to stay active. We just want a big pot, we're going to keep on the pressure, and we know he's been spewing a little bit, but it's not a terrible spot. I would do this with all of the range we're opening, basically, except some hands, you know, maybe 6-7, 7-8, stuff like that. I prefer to limp rather than min raise, but mostly going to be min raising our whole range. He basically shoves again, and we're just going to get rid of it, and we come to king 6. So here he's been pretty crazy. We have to think about what to do. We can limp, try to get to showdown cheaply, but he's been reshoving our limps a lot, and he hasn't really been reacting so much to our raises. So we just go ahead and raise and hope we take down the pot free flop most of the time. He calls this time. Flop, you know, not a really good flop for our hand, but given how he's been playing, we can't expect him to have an ace too much here, so it's a really good board to continuation bet. We do go ahead and make that bet, and we take it down one more time. Now I hope this illustrates to you guys really how powerful this continuation bet is, especially at lower limit games. People just play much too fit or fold. They have no idea of the textures of boards, which is something I'm going to get into more in the intermediate videos. So they're not check raising even when it's fairly clear that the board will not hit your hand most of the time. They're just trying to connect with their hand, and if they don't, they're getting rid of it. And that just gives so much open space for a ton of free chips almost every match. So really get into using that, and just make sure you don't get carried away with it against aggressive players, against people who get too crazy post-flop. He pre-flop still is being crazy, and that's fine. It's not really a big deal for us. We're just going to wait him out. We've been finding really good spots against him. We haven't played any big pots against him when we don't need to. Every pot that we've played, I felt, has been a really good spot for us, almost all of them. And here, again, is 10 big blinds deep. 11 actually, but he's posted one. So there are options. I know in the slideshow I showed you guys, if you're under 10 big blinds, you're just going to shove. There's two options with this hand. We're never going to min raise, really. So we can either shove or we can limp. The reason I like limping here is specifically because he's been shoving so often to our limps. So I limp here with the intention of calling a shove for 10 big blinds. So you guys see, if your player is aggressive, king high really is going to be best enough of the time, definitely enough of the time, to be limp calling. So when you're limping here, you should not be folding against an aggressive player. And that's also a mistake I see people do way too much, is min raising and then folding, or limping and then folding too often at 10 to 15 big blinds. So I limp. He chooses to check behind this time. Not really great for us. We would have preferred to get it in pre-flop because I really like our hand against his range. But the flop comes okay. We make our standard stab, 3/4 of the pot. If I didn't connect with this, if we had king in 9, for example, I would just check it back with king high. I don't think he really knows anything about what I'm going to be doing, but I definitely, in this spot, you just want to try to get the cheap showdown. But here we're betting for value for sure. I was hoping he would reshove any 5, some weaker 6s. You know, sometimes we're going to run into a 7, but if he's shoving when we're this short, I'm going to be comfortable getting it in with middle pair top kicker. The board comes a 2. He leads 100, and there's really no option here. There's going to be a blocking bet way too much of the time with a weaker 6 or a 5 that's trying to, you know, see the river card for free when he only has one more card to come. And we've seen him do this a couple times with bluffs, so we just stick it in here, and I'm really happy if he's calling us. He chooses not to, and we take down the pot. So here we come, 7 big blinds. Again, if you guys didn't look it up after the last video, you can Google Sage. It's on Card Player, the website, but if you just Google Sage plus card player, it'll be the first result there, and there's a little box at the bottom that teaches you how to play under 7 big blinds. I plan on discussing it more and explaining how, really what it is. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I just plan on showing it in the next set of videos, so that should help all of you guys at playing lower blinds, as hopefully these videos will. So he shoves, and we're getting it in all the time. Even if it was 10 or 11 big blinds, I would be calling him with ace-4, probably even deeper because of how crazy he was. So we put him all in for his last 40 chips. He shows up with 10-8 suited, which is actually a good play for him. He should be shoving this hand here. And after the cards come out, we take down the pot and the sit and go. So, I hope you guys learned something. Feel free to give me any comments in the forums or send me some private messages. Let me know what you guys think, or if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer those for you. So, good luck, and I will see you at the next video.